Hi, Hendrik. So,
Hello.
um, thank you for being with me again. This is a second interview about your professional story that you want to share with all the Next Gen Link participants. So, to present myself, I am Lauriane. I am from France. I studied at EDEC Business School. I was Secretary General of Oikos for a year. Now I am part of the Next Gen Lead team and the communication part in care of the social network and everything. I live here in New York City. And I'm really, really interested today to know what professional story you want to share. But first, I would love for you to present yourself and tell us a little bit more about you, your path, and your professional path before we start to introduce yourself. So yeah, let me know.
Yeah, thank you, Lauriane, for having me again. um, yes, so professional path. So I graduated 2017, which is already a while back. It feels like decades. The last 3 years have been insane. Mm, so in business administration, e-business, and sustainable city development. So sustainability has been a part of my path for a while and kind of still twinkles in a bit in my work. Or I'm more focused on the whole developmental capacity, competence development area. So I got in 2013 right away into IESIC. It's the world's biggest student-run organization in 128 countries. They're sending volunteers and professional interns around the world into these 128 countries since 1945. So it's been around for a long, long time. Fun fact, I'm second generation even. So my dad has ran the organization back in 81, a while back. um, and I've jumped right into it and did a lot of different things inside of it. And that's most of my experience next to a bunch of projects, running conferences and working for a startup for a bit. But mainly I spent 6 years of my 6.5 years almost. No, 6.5 years inside of the organization, running the local chapter in marketing, running the marketing department for Germany as one product for it, and then coaching people on the US, being on conferences all around Europe. And then the last experience, and that's where I'm going to dive into, second to last actually. I ran the HR development and marketing department in ISIC in Oman in the Middle East. Came back, certified people in training, and then became a freelance trainer. So I'm a certified systematic coach. I'm a certified collective leadership facilitator. That would be it's a German certification, so the word's a bit different. And also been very active in the art of hosting and create a bunch of conferences for leadership and personal development inside the student realm, but now also continue to do it for young people as part of the Inner World Tribe, which is mainly the project I'm working on, where we'll really look into how to create a gym for the inner world for young people around the world, for young professionals. But yeah, that's my wrap up, I would say, of who I am and what I do right now.
Thank you, Hendrik. And so today you want to share a professional story that will cover multiple core competences, but will focus more on system thinking. So please let us know, what is your story? We're really excited to hear you.
Yeah, I would say it's the most challenging year I ever experienced because I moved to Oman in 2017 summer to 2018 summer. That was my time there. Almost complete 12 months going there and then running the organization there. So to give you an idea how that looked, because it's not that big and the organization is not that big, but we were a team. My president was from India, who originally worked in the board in Sri Lanka. Then I had another colleague from Sri Lanka, another one from Egypt, and a Bangladeshi who grew up in Oman. But you, as an expat, so as an immigrant, if your parents immigrated, you never can become a citizen in the Middle East. I think, for none of the countries, or mainly like the Gulf area. So he was born and raised there, but he's a Bangladeshi, even though he lived his entire life in Oman. Another German and I, we were kind of the team. We were supposed to have someone from Ethiopia for the marketing, but he didn't get a visa because he was from Ethiopia. So we had to figure that out. And after a while, his role disappeared. And pretty much from the start, everything went downhill. Like the team before broke up a bit, so we didn't get a transition. We arrived and there was a legal problem, so we were not allowed to enter the universities, and we were sending students abroad. Not going to university was a problem. We had an intern who had a problem with a company, and there was a lot of conversation with that. And since we didn't get a transition, we had no idea what like previous conversations were. We had almost no context to alumni. And we couldn't solve the legal problem, because in order to solve any governmental legal situations, you need an Omani on your side. But as you just heard, none of our teammates were on Omani. So we needed alumni to help us. But then the culture there is very, very different. Oman is a beautiful country. I loved it there. The experience was beautiful. A friend of mine always says, like, learning is often not fun when you're in it. And I learned a lot that year. But yeah, so we almost landed in jail twice. We had to close up the organization almost 3 times. The internal team struggles. I wasn't the biggest fan of my president. One of the Germans got kicked out at some point. The second half of the time, I actually fell into a low-level depression, just doing my stuff, going through the routines, not really caring anymore. And it ended up me diving into personal development a lot, and a lot of who I am today and where I ended up, because I faced a lot of shadows in that year, is thanks to that low point. Though that's not what I want to dive into. I share that story a lot in different spaces of how that actually opened up a lot of doors, diving into intimacy and shame and working through shame. Highly recommend Brené Brown's work if that topic triggers anything for you. She's one of my heroes. But what I want to talk about was me being there as a trained facilitator and team developer and trainer, and coming out of that team dynamic competence development view, being vice president of HR, organization development, and then later marketing, because I was the one who knew about marketing. So I had 3 roles. At some point, I also was president interim or proxy for our local chapter, because we had to kick out the president. So I took over doing that as well. So I had multiple hats on my head, and I tried at the beginning to do the team development for my team. So I did the team building a lot together with my president. I tried to facilitate a lot of the conflicts we had inside, and because I knew how to hold conflict. I've done a lot of mediating. The problem was, me going into that role meant that I wasn't completely inside the process myself. So I put on the role of the mediator and facilitator. So I split myself on being there and being Hendrik and being in my roles and being the facilitator, which I didn't get at the time because I just thought I helped. Reality, to be honest, I, in the long run, made it worse, because I mediated and solved the conflicts in the moment. I didn't allow us to explode. I didn't allow myself to really dive into I couldn't go into the storming, positioning what I really wanted. Because as a mediator and facilitator, you don't voice your opinion. You make sure everybody else does. And only true masters can do both. It doesn't really work. And I realized that sitting, and that's the ridiculous part. I was sitting with one of my teammates closer to the end of the experience, when we kind of had the new board elected and kind of we're in handing over mode. And we had the conversation about back in the days. And then was like, man, I felt we should have just kicked out our president and reorganized everything and just pretend to start from the beginning. I was like, I had the same idea. I was like, why did we never talk about this? Because I thought you were not wanting to do this. And I was like, whoa, shoot. Like, I created that separation apart as well, because I didn't really dive in as me in my roles. my president also strategically kind of never had these conversations in the room with everybody. So we didn't have a space there, but I could have created that context for the rest of the team to have these conversations instead of trying to solve the problem at hand. By me trying to fix the short-term thing, I feeded the feedback loop and that nurtured that structure of staying in the same conflict because we didn't address the foundational problems. So by me trying to help and do what I do best, I actually supported creating the environment we were in instead of addressing the fundamental problem. I thought I was addressing the fundamental problem with not realizing with my jumping in there, going into the facilitator role, feeding it backwards. So the balancing feedback loop of creating that as it is instead of opening it up into a different direction was actually co-created by me. And to be honest, saying this now here, sitting with you, that took me until now to accept that. I think this is the first time I speak about this, not being emotional and blaming and shaming my teammates and especially my president. I think I have some recordings of me to friends where I'm like completely opposite. And it really took me time to go through that. But really looking at with a systematic view, meaning, okay, when you look at the world with a system thinking perspective, you are a co-creator of your reality. There's not the soul outside. Blaming, shaming never works either. But I didn't really face what I could have been able to face. I faced something else, which I was ready for. I wasn't able to face that, whatever I could have learned from that in that moment. By really surrendering to, okay, this is going to be messed up and we want to fight. And my need for harmony was very present. And I went into the skills instead of allowing it to be and happen. Yeah. And a lot other, like, I mean, the emotional atmosphere in that moment was very, very heightened. As said, like, the passport of one of my teammates was collected by the police at some point, so he couldn't leave the country anymore. It was hard. And then we were all living in a house and we didn't have a car. And if you live in the Middle East and you don't have a car, you don't have a life. You pretty much cannot go outside because it's 40 degrees in the shade. So we were stuck with each other most of the time. And yeah, I'm immensely grateful for that experience, to be honest. I'm immensely, immensely grateful. If you asked Hendrik from New Year 17, 18, he wasn't happy about that experience or grateful or anything. But now looking back, I learned a lot from it. And also now I'm really diving into system thinking, taking responsibility to the part I played in co-creating the reality I was in there. And all the other things that came out of it is just beautiful. And sometimes hard times are there to teach you something. And that was really okay. I'm part of this team, so I need an external to come in, or completely am part of this team, and I will let go. I need to position myself because there are this team phases. I don't know if you're familiar with Tuckman's team phases. So I didn't allow the team. I guided the rest of the team through the storming into performing, but to forget that I'm part of the team as well. So we didn't not really as a team go through the phase. The rest of the team as a team went through it without me. So I kind of contributed for us never getting out of the storming phase because I didn't really participate as a teammate. Yeah. And looking inside, it's like, okay, how can I shift the way I'm looking at this? How can I shift the way of participating here to create a different reality and a different outcome? And that doesn't mean like I don't take responsibility, or my president wasn't ready for that role at all. A lot of us were unqualified, as it's so often, and I would say 100% of the time is for student initiatives. We always jump into roles we have never done before, so we're all super unqualified. And that's how we learn. That's why it's a practice ground, and a beautiful practice ground, and we grow and able to find our path through these challenges that we face. Yeah. I think that that's it. I can go on and go on about this topic. I mean, there is so much in that year, but I wanted to jump into that, me trying to facilitate my own team development process, because having too many hats at once, and now looking back, whoa, I actually was part of the problem from a systematic perspective. From a linear view, I was solving problems all day, but like in a bigger long-term perspective, I kept us in the state we were in through the action I was taking.
Thank you for sharing this story. I could definitely relate to a lot of it from my personal experience, even though it was not, as complicated circumstances as being in another country and having like all this lack of resources and all those complications. But I can completely understand this, wanting to solve something and then you don't realize you're actually part of the problem. And it's so frustrating because especially when you're the type of person who really appreciate being the solver, and you want to help people, and then you realize what you're doing do more harm. But then it's just because it's not entirely your fault. Usually, like as you say, you were really young, you didn't have like some resources to be able to handle that back then. But it's really interesting what you said. Actually, there is part of next gen program called the Oops Night, where we are going to talk about reflection on, fails in our life and, what we learned from it, and, we can grow. And I was thinking about it when you were talking because, and you touch upon it a little bit, but we learn a lot also through failure. And what you said also about, and I actually would love to hear a little more about that. You said that was the first time you talked actually about this story without like, being too emotional. How can we, what advice would you give to somebody who lived through something like this and continue feeling really emotional about it and feeling shame, as you said, or feeling like upset? How would you, and I guess something you probably do with personal development, but how do you, or can you better process this type of experience and really try to be positive and it's part of your story, but it's not something that you should feel bad about, or you should like let yourself feel bad about. I don't know if it's clear, but
So what I'm hearing is like, how did I do, or what's my perspective on changing my way of looking into my own story? Because I mentioned that part of like, or the year afterwards, I was so angry with everything. And I mean, shame has more to do with my it's a whole different story about me. So the shame part, I would separate that, because shame has to do for me, in my personal story, has to do way more with intimacy and sexuality. And I kind of faced my personal story back then because I kind of avoided dealing with my team. So I went into my own story in my personal life, which got me into a whole different journey. But looking there, for me, the emotion predominantly was resentment, anger, lots of frustration. Later, a lot of guilt for resigning, because I also had resignation in there. And what I'm doing here right now is the first thing you do, is naming them. From an emotional intelligence point, dealing with emotions is only done by actually putting a name to them, pointing at them, what am I feeling? And there are beautiful emotional maps you can use to get an idea of that, is naming them and then having someone to process it with. We process emotions not by ourselves. Like you can go all Zen and completely meditate and surrender and let go and surrender and let go. That's a process as well. I'm not the big fan of that. I think it's more, we're social social beings, social animals, and it's more powerful and also more effective to actually have people to talk with and process this. And it will be difficult at the beginning because people need to be able to hold the anger, hold their frustration, and then maybe hold also the guilt that you carry, and then not judging yourself again in that moment. It's really just seeing, I am in this, but I am in this, not I am this. It's also little nuances in language are super powerful because our language is constructing our reality. So that kind of started that, and me facing that step by step, and then exploring new perspectives. And I think the last shift, the last nudge that gave me the kick now to really take responsibility and ownership also to the part I played in that part in that story, was that systematic thinking view. That's why I said, like, I think this is a focus on that, because that was the last nudge. Because who am I to say everything is interconnected and playing together, but then I'm not taking responsibility in that part? And then, okay, forgiveness. Oh yeah, that's probably the biggest thing ever. And how many hours of forgiveness meditations and exercises I have done on my president, on that experience, to really face it. And for me, forgiveness, also a lot of forgiveness exercises I teach and do with people, has to do with rephrasing and looking into what is in the story of the other person, how else can I look at this, because you can find the narrative that pleases you, because carrying these resentment, anger, and frustration with me is my choice, which is really mean to say, but it's a choice for ourselves. And I do that in coaching, sometimes telling my coaching that's a choice. You might not be happy and you want to blame the other person, but you blaming the other person still is your choice. And when you blame and you shame or whatever outside, that usually means that you're not willing to learn something and face something that's inside. And then time. I think the last part is time. I said it took me 3 years to get to this point, and learning and practicing forgiveness, emotional intelligence, finding people to work with it through this as well, having friends, creating partnerships and colleagues, going to retreats where I had a space to work through this. Because sadly, majority of society doesn't give us the space for that, to do this properly. So if you're a responsible leader, who was listening to this, I highly encourage you to create a company in a space where you're doing this. That's what we try to do with the Inner World Tribe, to actually practice these things. Because I can tell you this, and you can understand it cognitively, but in the end, it's diving into and practicing it. That's why it took me 3 years. If I'm a better practicer with forgiveness and emotional intelligence, then it takes me a lot of things that happen these days. I'm getting faster with this, but that was also, I haven't, in the last 3 years, haven't experienced something that intense as that year. But yeah, I think I hope that answered your question of how.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. I think that was really, really interesting to share. And, as I say, touching upon another exercise we are going to be doing, Engage and Lead. I'll just move on to the two last question. What is the main takeaway you want people who just watch your story to take?
You're co-creator of your reality. That means it's not all out there. It's almost nothing is out there. Most of it is how we look at it, how we engage with it. So taking ownership, and there's even a book called Total Ownership. That's interesting to read about this as well. It's more military focused, but yeah, take responsibility, go inside and see what am I doing to co-create that reality I'm living in? And if you're not happy with the reality you're living in, then look at that. And maybe then you make a choice to stay there because something else is more important for you, but then it's your choice to stay there. It's always your choice to stay there.
Thank you. And what would be the best practice you would recommend based on the story you just shared?
So the one thing that jumps into me is self-awareness, which is pretty simple, but observing the internal dialogue. Because I think that's a superpower humans have. A lot of spiritual and meditation talks about this observer. And if you can get in there, then you don't get lost in the internal dialogue, lost in the emotions you experience, lost in the sensations that you have, and getting to that, self-awareness, self-observation, self-consciousness. I think self-consciousness is the best word to use there. And practice that is really immensely, immensely powerful, because everything else, because once you become self-aware and self-conscious, then you're aware of your choices. And when you're aware of your choices, you can start making different choices, because there are no problems. There are truly, that's a weird thing to say for some people, but there are no problems. It's complexity misunderstood. So meaning you haven't seen the perspective yet towards your reality that gives you a choice that's better than the three choices that you're seeing right now. There is always a different choice. You just don't see it yet. And that has a lot to do with how I look at the world. So self-awareness, self-consciousness is very powerful there. And the last thing, do practice forgiveness. Forgiveness is actually the number one scientific proven thing you can do next to gratitude to live a happy and fulfilled life.
And I guess forgive the other and also forgive yourself.
Yes, forgiveness has not just external, it's also forgiving yourself. I've done entire days and in meditation just going through my story and forgiving everything I messed up. I presume do not say that anymore. And just like, that's who I was back then. Because looking back in your story and then who I am right now could have done this so much better. But yeah, you are now an adult. You have you experienced the thing that went so horribly wrong. So now you can understand this looking backward. But you were not that person then in that moment. We are changing. We are always in the process of becoming and always are changing. So yeah, forgiving yourself, forgiving others, forgiving the world, forgiving the universe. Yeah. So self-awareness / self-consciousness in order to become aware of your choices and perspective and perceptions. And the other one would be forgiveness to really work through these, low points, dark moments in your story, to learn from them and let go, to find the golden nuggets. I only could find the golden nuggets once I started looking at it with a more calm and open-hearted way. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much again for sharing this professional story with us today. Yeah, thank you so much.